Welcome back to Burn the Haystack with Josh and Jesse, Easter edition.
Yeah. Hope that you enjoyed yesterday's talk all about death, which is a weird thing to say.
Yeah, it was a bit more of a solemn note, that one.
Yeah. So today we are talking about rest because, as we all know, Jesus died on Friday afternoon, and then on the Saturday or the Sabbath, he rested. So we're going to pick up the story from Luke chapter 23, right where we left off. And I'm going to be reading verse 50 all the way through verse 56. The burial of Jesus. Now there was a man named Joseph, a member of the council, a good and upright man who had not consented to their decision and actions. He came from the Judean town of Arimathea, and he himself was waiting for the kingdom of God. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body. Then he took it down, wrapped it in linen cloth, and placed it in a tomb cut in the rock, one in which no one had yet been laid. It was preparation day, and the Sabbath was about to begin. So we're not even at Sabbath yet. This is still Friday afternoon. The woman who had come with Jesus from Galilee followed Joseph and saw the tomb and how his body was laid in it. Then they went home and prepared spices and perfumes. But they rested on the Sabbath in obedience to the commandment. And that's like the only sentence that even mentions the Sabbath part of this.
They still kept obedience to the commandment, even in that sort of situation.
Yeah. This is the somber part. This is, I suppose, the aftermath of the crucifixion. This is the part where Jesus' followers would have been scattered, afraid, broken, paranoid. All these sort of emotions would have been swirling around their heads at this point in time. Imagine what it would be like to be one of Jesus' followers. We talked yesterday about how when Jesus died, a little part of them would have died as well, with all the emotion, the dreams, the hopes, and the desires that they would have invested in the person of Jesus. So imagine how they would have felt at this point in time.
Yeah, it's that the day after things, your world's fallen apart, but life still goes on for everybody else. The Sabbath is still there. The Pharisees are still going to synagogue and that sort of thing. It's all still just going along. But what would a disciple do then? You imagine someone like Peter, who just had that whole thing with denying Jesus. Man, the shame he would have felt in this sort of time. And John, who was the closest to Jesus, man, those guys just would have been shattered.
You would imagine that there would be a somewhat of a tearful reunion between Peter and the rest of the disciples, because Peter would have felt so guilty. He would have felt so ashamed. And yet it's like, where else would he have had to go?
Yeah.
Where else could he go? He had to go back to his brothers. I imagine the scene of Peter coming back to the disciples, admitting what he'd done, tearfully asking for their forgiveness, and then them being so broken. They wouldn't have held it against him, I imagine, but just that moment that we don't get to see. We don't get to see that insight, that moment into that story, but you can still imagine what that might have been like.
Yeah, and I can't imagine too many of them would have gone to synagogue or anything like that. No.
No.
How could you? They're so ashamed. You would have felt like the Pharisees won. Yeah. The religion won in a way.
I find it fascinating what you mentioned before, that for everybody else, the world around them, the world just goes on. Life goes on, The priests would be preaching their sermons around Passover. Everybody would be going to synagogue and attending the last sort of Passover ceremonies who were in the city. Pilate would have been just awaiting the time when everybody would be going home and everybody could go back to normal. And yet it was like time was frozen for the followers of Jesus, that they were frozen in this place of grief and suffering.
And I think it makes, I don't think they kept that Sabbath and rested just because of the commandment. Yeah. I think it was also something that was very meaningful and real to them, that they really felt there was a need right now to rest. You would have wanted to do a whole lot of, I feel like they probably would have wanted to run away. They would have wanted to do all sorts of things, but instead they chose to rest after that. Yeah. Pretty bold move.
I think that's a really important step in the grief process, isn't it? when you go through a tragedy, when you go through a death, the death of your psyche, or the death of a dream, or the death of something, a lot of people are tempted to rebound from that, to just try and go in the complete opposite direction. How many times have you seen a relational breakup, boyfriend and girlfriend, maybe even a husband and wife, and then in the intervening weeks, months, sometimes even years after that breakup, you have the two ex-spouses sort of competing over who won the breakup,
Yeah.
who's happier, who's moved on more.
It's so vicious.
It's so, yeah. And it's like this Days of Our Lives drama that gets played out on social media for weeks, sometimes months, even years afterwards.
And I think that's the thing. When we have something terrible happen, we often try and just fill ourselves with something else in order to not feel and not have to think. Whether it's, you come home after something terrible and then you just binge watch Netflix, just so you don't have to think about life. You want to think about something else, or you just blast music into your ears until you don't think, or maybe going to the clubs and just getting smashed. Heaps of people do that, and I don't think it's exactly healthy.
And there are even people who do really healthy things, which in any other context would be considered a really great thing. But in the context of the energy surrounding the grief, the trauma, the death, end up coming out really unhealthy. Like, I know of somebody who, after their breakup with their spouse, just went and lost a whole heap of weight, and they just completely transformed their body and their image and, their wardrobe, because it was like, well, they're trying to get back at their ex, because it's like, you didn't want me then, bet you want me now.
Yeah,
sort
hitting
of
the
thing.
gym super hard.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, good for you. Like, I'm happy for you that you're healthier now, but who's it for? Is it for you or is it for them?
So I suppose, it is important to move on, and it's still important to do things, but you have to allow yourself time to rest and reflect.
Yeah.
After something has died, after you've lost a job, or you've lost a partner, or there's been a physical death, or even the death of a dream, like we talked about. You have to have time to rest and reflect, look back, think about it. Because I think if you spend time actually thinking, which these days it feels like there's no time to actually think, you'd be amazed what you can come up with and what you realize in yourself when you actually have time to reflect.
The Jews did this really well. They have this idea of lament. In the Bible, there's an entire book called Lamentations, which is just a book of grief and lament. The whole, oh God, why did you leave me? Oh God, why did you let my enemies come and do all these terrible things for me? You look at one of the most famous figures in the biblical narrative, David, who was this warrior poet, killed thousands of people in his time. Like, if you believe the stories are true and the historical accounts, bloodthirsty man. And yet this battle-hardened guy, when you read the Psalms, goes from being completely joyful, praising God, extolling his virtues, all that sort of stuff, to depression and just letting it all out, which is not what guys like to do. Usually the modern man, the modern Western man at least, bottles things up, tries to be the strong one, tries to be, the strong silent type.
Yeah, hiding away in the man cave, or
Yeah, that's right.
in the
That's
shed,
right.
or something like that. And I suppose it's important to remember that recovery from something like this, it's not a race.
Yeah.
It's no race. It's not about who can recover the fastest, who can be back on top of everything straight away. That's absolutely not what it is about. It's actually you need to be right. You need to figure this out, and you need to have time. Life does go on, and you do need to step into it again, but you still need to allow yourself time to reflect.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what we talk about. If without rest, you just sort of rebound. Yeah. If you don't actually take adequate time to rest and reflect, you'll just rebound and cling to something else and end up breaking your heart even further.
Yeah. How many times, have you seen the rebound boyfriend, the rebound girlfriend? And usually the rebound boyfriend, the rebound girlfriend, it doesn't last. It's just a fling. It's just a exciting moment to forget the grief. And that's just in in one circumstance. You know, this may not be applicable to a relationship, as Josh mentioned before. Could be the death of a dream. Could be the death of hopes and desires. Could be the death of something else. So if it's a hobby, a literal boyfriend, girlfriend relationship, something else to cling to, don't be too quick to move on. Allow yourself that time for that Sabbath rest. The grief process is a process. It's not something that you can just get done with in a day or two. Sometimes maybe you can, and if you can, let us know how. Give yourself that time because you need it for you to be the whole person that you need to be in order to give yourself best to the world and the people around you. You need rest.
So what better day to think about it than today? Many of you are coming together to celebrate Sabbath, taking this time. And so, yeah, embrace rest, embrace what's been given to you in this time. Let yourself heal. That's it from us for today. So thanks so much for joining us. We'll speak to you again tomorrow. Josh and Jesse out.